Okay, here we have the final media clip, Disabilities for Educating Exceptional Students. Here we will be describing the characteristics of each disability learned in class, as well as using UDL and DI strategies, how we would incorporate or include and integrate these students into a setting that we would be working in as speech and language pathologist or in the classroom setting. And our first one is communication disorders. The definition, according to our book, is stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment, or a voice impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. Some characteristics of this may be a speech disorder or a language disorder. A speech disorder is difficulty producing sounds and disorders of voice quality. So this is something that speech and language pathologists would work with often. If a child has difficulty producing a sound, we would work with them, helping them strengthen their movements, their oral motor movements, so that they can produce that sound. And then language disorder, there are two types, receptive and expressive. A receptive language disorder is having difficulty receiving or understanding information being given to them. And expressive is having a difficulty formulating, expressing those ideas and information using their language. UDL and DI strategies for a communication disorder some could include scaffolding, helping them with content, being able to provide that extra boost that they need with their speech, getting them comfortable and moving them along, helping them to become confident in their speech. AAC devices, providing a communication device for them, and then obviously a speech and language pathologist would help to develop the sounds like I had mentioned. Our next one is specific learning disability. The definition according to our book is a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language spoken or written. Some characteristics, these are some of the ones that our book had mentioned. A reading disability is an umbrella term for dyslexia, which falls underneath a reading disability. There are also math disabilities, struggles with memory, and as well as social and emotional needs that they may not be able to express. So ways to help using strategies would be to provide outlines of notes, being able to help them. This would help specifically, especially with reading or in a math disability, being able to provide an outline more specific to what they may need, helping them organize their work, whether it may be a planner, folders, however that may look, and then of course accommodating to them. And the next one we have is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The definition according to our book, limited strength, vitality, or alertness that adversely affects the student's progress in school. So there are two types of ADHD, the inattention type and the hyperactivity type. In the inattention type, children may struggle with paying attention to details, following instructions, finishing tasks, organizing, sustaining mental effort, remembering daily activities, and things of that nature. And you must have difficulty with 6 or more. And then a few listed for hyperactivity. Keeping hands or feet still, they're constantly moving, staying seated, they have struggles with talking excessively, blurting out answers, and fidgeting a lot. Ways to help them and being able to accommodate to their needs in a clinical setting or classroom setting, incorporating hands-on activities, and that's very easy to do for a speech and language pathologist, getting up, moving around, making scavenger hunts, flashcards, interactive activities, flexible seating as shown in the picture, and then also allowing breaks for them to gain their focus again. We also have traumatic brain injury, which is an acquired injury to the brain caused by an external physical force resulting in total or partial functional disability, or psychosocial impairment, or both, that adversely affects a child's educational performance. Some characteristics may be physical changes, cognitive and academic changes, or emotional, behavioral, and social changes. Some physical changes may include coordination problems, physical weakness, fatigue. Cognitive and academic changes may be problems associated with memory, planning, processing, things of that nature. Emotional behavior and social changes, forming relationships and friendships, or often not being able to understand that their actions have consequences. So ways to help them would be scaffolding, as mentioned before, skeleton outlines, making them outlines that they can follow along with so that they are not getting lost as easily, help them prepare ahead of time with content, and then obviously building their language if that is something that they have lost. Next is autism spectrum disorder. The definition is a developmental disability that significantly affects verbal and nonverbal communication and social interaction, is generally evident before the age of 3, and adversely affects a student's educational performance. Some characteristics I have listed. The ones that speech and language pathologists would focus on most are social communication impairments, as well as atypical language development. It is important to help them obviously learn their language so that they may express their needs in social communication outside of a classroom as well as not only just in a classroom. Some UDL and DI strategies. One mentioned in our book was an AAC device. If they are mute, helping them to express what they are thinking using that. Working on the social communication, as I mentioned, and then a lot of times having a structured environment is very helpful, as this is something that they do struggle with. Physical disabilities is our next one. The definition: severe orthopedic impairment that adversely affects a student's educational performance. Certain characteristics: cerebral palsy, spina bifida, epilepsy, asthma, diabetes. Obviously, asthma and diabetes are not as physical. They are not seen on the outside most times. But for a speech and language pathologist, cerebral palsy is one that is often worked with. Being able to help them strengthen their vocal folds and motor movements is very important, allowing them to speak and be able to communicate. So that is something, strategies that can be used to help them. And then for the physical disabilities in a classroom, accessibility, helping them to get around, making sure that everything is safe for them. Our next one is intellectual disability. We have our definition: significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior and manifested during the developmental period that adversely affects a child's educational performances. So some characteristics of this would be limitations in intellectual functioning. Their brain they do not have a very high IQ. It would be 70 or below to be considered an intellectual disability. And then limitations in adaptive behavior. There are 3 categories: conceptual, which would be language, reading, writing, money, things of that nature, which is something that a speech and language pathologist would focus on a lot. Social, responsibility, self-esteem, things of that nature, and then practical daily living tasks. These are all things that would need, that an individual with intellectual disability may need help with. So ways to help them would be modifying curriculum, guiding them during tests, and then helping them with those functional skills, as well as the social and language, reading, writing, things of that. Our next one is visual impairment. An impairment in vision that, even with correction, adversely affects a child's educational performance. We have reduced visual acuity, which is just when your vision is really, really fuzzy, you still have ability to see color and things like that. Your restricted field of vision, that's almost tunnel vision. Your low vision, you still have a little bit of that sense of vision, Functionally blind, they rely mostly on Braille, but do have ability to see a little bit. And then there is totally blind, where that is not a sense that they have, and they have to rely more on touch, hearing, the senses like that. So helping them would be providing an AAC device, being able to talk to them through that. Siri is very, very useful nowadays. And then practicing that communication, because they are lacking a sense, to be able to help them build up their other ones. Hearing impairments, the definition, result of an impaired auditory sensitivity and or diminished speech intelligibility of the physiological auditory system. And this is a definition according to ASHA. There are 3 different types of hearing loss: conductive, sensorineural, and mixed. These involve the outer ear, middle ear, and inner ear. Conductive is outer ear, sensorineural is inner ear, and then mixed is obviously both of those together. And individuals with hearing impairments are obviously something that people that speech and language pathologists work with often. So ways to help them: provide options for communication. Like I mentioned, once you lose a sense, it is harder. So you have to help build up the others, practicing their speech development, working signs on sign language with them, and then as well as an AAC device allowing them to communicate their needs. Our next one, emotional behavioral disorders. The definition refers to a condition that is accompanied by one or more of certain characteristics over a long time and to a marked degree, and that adversely affects a child's educational performance. Characteristics. There are emotional characteristics. These are anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, things of that nature. Intellectual and academic characteristics. That would be struggling in school. And then we also have behavioral characteristics. There are 2 types of behavioral characteristics: internal or external. So you can internalize them or externalize them. And ways to help these individuals: practicing communication is obviously a big thing that speech and language pathologists do. I feel like I've hit that nail multiple times, but that is something that is important. And then also introducing mindfulness to them and helping them, being a safe place for them to go. And then our last one is gifted and talented. Children possessing demonstrated or potential abilities that give evidence of high performance capability in areas such as intellectual, creative, specific academic or leadership ability, or in the performing and visual arts, and who by reason thereof require services or activities not ordinarily provided by the school. So these are your students who do excel in school typically. Characteristics: they have high general intellect, very creative, oftentimes do have good leadership ability, and then social and emotional characteristics can really vary depending on the individual, and a lot of times they do lack some of that. So ways to help them would be to help them with their social and emotional characteristics if needed. Creating content is interesting to them, and pushing them in language learning vocab would be very beneficial for a speech and language pathologist, and a way for them to be involved. And then we have our references, Iris, and then the book. And that is all. Thank you.